The rain began just as Emily Carter turned onto the long highway that would take her and her stepson back home to Portland, and she told herself it was only a passing storm, the kind that looked worse than it was, but deep down she felt the same tension that had been sitting quietly in her chest for months, the kind that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the silence between her and 17-year-old Noah Bennett, who sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, tall. Now, thoughtful, no longer the shy boy she had first met 3 years ago when she married his father, Daniel Bennett, and tried her best to step gently into a life that already had history written all over it. The car hummed steadily at first, windshield wipers moving back and forth like a slow clock counting down something neither of them understood yet, and Emily tried to start small talk about school, about Noah's college plans, about the basketball game he had mentioned once, but his answers were short, polite, careful, never rude, just distant enough to remind her that she still stood on the edge of his world, not fully inside it, and she wondered, not for the first time, if she had tried too hard or not enough, if loving someone who wasn't ready to accept it was always going to feel this fragile. And just when she opened her mouth to try again, the car jerked hard beneath them, a sharp grinding noise cutting through the soft sound of rain, and the engine light flashed. Like a warning they could not ignore, Emily's heart pounded as she eased the car onto the shoulder of the road, tires rolling over wet gravel, steam rising from under the hood in thin white clouds that looked almost ghostly in the fading light, and for a moment the only sound was the rain tapping on metal and glass, steady and patient, as if waiting for them to say something, but neither of them did, because the breakdown felt bigger than a simple machine failure. It felt like the perfect picture of everything unspoken between them. Noah was the first to move, pushing open the door and stepping out into the rain without hesitation, his sneakers darkening as they hit the wet pavement, and he stood in front of the car with his hands on his hips, staring at the hood like he could fix it if he just looked hard enough, and Emily watched him from inside, noticing how much he had grown, how his shoulders were broader now, how his expression carried more responsibility than most boys his age, and she realized that somewhere between school runs and family dinners she had missed the moment he stopped being a child and started becoming a young man. She stepped out too, the cold air brushing against her face, and called roadside assistance with steady hands even though her thoughts raced, and when the operator told her the tow truck would take at least 2 hours because of the storm, she felt frustration rise but forced it down, because she had learned that staying calm was the only way to keep things from falling apart completely, and when she hung up, Noah looked at her with a question in his eyes that he did not speak, and she answered it anyway by saying, "We'll figure it out," hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. The highway was nearly empty, cars passing only once in a while, their headlights streaking through the rain like brief flashes of another world moving forward while they stood still, and as they waited inside the car, the silence felt heavier than before, not angry, not bitter, just full of words that never found the courage to be said, and Emily glanced at Noah and almost told him how hard she had tried these past years, how every school event and birthday cake and quiet conversation had been her way of saying she cared, but she held back because she did not want to make him feel pressured, and Noah, for his part, wanted to say he noticed her effort, wanted to admit he did not hate her, that he had simply been afraid to open his heart again after his parents' divorce had shaken his sense of safety, but he kept that inside. 2. Because being vulnerable felt risky. When the tow truck finally arrived, its yellow lights blinking through the rain, the driver was kind but matter-of-fact, explaining that the engine problem was serious and the nearest repair shop was already closed for the night, and the closest small town was 15 minutes away with only one simple hotel still open, and Emily nodded, knowing they had no choice but to stay there until morning, and as they climbed into the truck's cabin, sitting closer than they had in months, she felt a strange mix of worry and relief, because sometimes being forced to pause was exactly what life intended. The town they reached was quiet, almost frozen in time, with a single main street, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a modest roadside hotel glowing softly under the streetlights, and when they stepped into the lobby, warm air wrapped around them like a temporary comfort, and the clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, handed Emily a key to a room with 2 beds and wished them a peaceful night, unaware that peace was the one thing both of them had been searching for. As they walked down the narrow hallway, Emily felt the weight of the moment settle in, because for the first time there would be no distractions, no busy schedules, no separate rooms to retreat to, just one quiet space where the distance between them could either grow sharper or finally begin to soften. And when she opened the door to the small but clean room, light spilling across neatly made beds and simple furniture, she realized that this unexpected stop might become more than an inconvenience. It might become a turning point neither of them had planned, and as Noah set his bag down and looked around with a thoughtful expression, Emily felt her heart beat with a cautious hope, because sometimes a broken car on a rainy highway was not the end of a journey, but the quiet beginning of something that had been waiting patiently to start. The hotel room felt smaller. Once the door clicked shut, as if the walls had moved in just enough to make silence impossible to ignore, and Emily Carter stood near the window watching rain slide down the glass in thin silver lines while Noah Bennett dropped his backpack onto one of the beds and rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to say now that there was nowhere else to look but at each other. The air smelled like fresh sheets and old carpet, clean but faintly worn, and outside the neon sign from across the street blinked red and blue against the dark sky, casting soft color into the room like a slow heartbeat, and Emily realized this was the first time in months they had been alone together without Daniel around to fill the quiet with work stories or news updates, and that thought made her both nervous and strangely hopeful. Her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel saying he was sorry he couldn't be there and asking if everything was okay, and she typed back a quick reply, "We're fine, just staying the night," but she didn't add that fine had become a word she used too often when she meant complicated, and when she looked up, she caught Noah watching her, not with resentment like before, but with something softer, something searching. He broke the tension by asking what they were going to eat, and she let out a small laugh, grateful for something simple to solve, and after a short call to the only pizza place still open in town, they found themselves sitting at the tiny round table near the window sharing a large pepperoni pizza and 2 cans of soda from the vending machine, and it felt almost normal, almost like the early days when she had tried to bond with him over board games and movie nights that had ended politely but without real warmth. Tonight was different though, because there was no rush, no clock ticking toward another appointment, just the steady drum of rain and the quiet understanding that they had time. Noah reached for another slice and then paused, looking at her like he had something heavy on his mind, and finally he said that his dad had been gone a lot lately, traveling for work, missing dinners and school events, and Emily nodded slowly, knowing the truth in his words, feeling it too in the empty side of her bed back home, and she admitted that sometimes she felt like she was managing everything alone, though she said it gently, not as a complaint but as a simple fact, and Noah listened in a way he hadn't before. Really listened, his usual guarded expression replaced by concern. He asked if she ever got tired of pretending things were perfect, and the question hit her harder than she expected, because she had spent years trying to be the calm center of the family, the steady voice, the one who didn't add more problems to an already fragile situation, and she realized in that moment that he had noticed more than she thought, that he saw her late nights at the kitchen table, the way she sometimes stared into space after a long phone call with Daniel, the small sighs she thought no one heard. She told him she didn't want to make life harder for anyone, especially not for him, and he looked down at his hands and admitted that he hadn't made it easy either, that when his parents divorced he promised himself he wouldn't get close to anyone new because he didn't want to feel that kind of change again, and hearing that felt like a door opening quietly in a dark room. Emily didn't rush to fill the space with advice, she just let him speak, and he went on to say that he had kept her at a distance not because he disliked her but because he was afraid that liking her would somehow mean betraying his mom, and the honesty in his voice made her chest ache in the best and worst way at the same time, she leaned back in her chair and told him that hearts were not limited spaces, that caring about one person didn't erase love for another, that families could grow in ways that didn't replace what came before. And he met her eyes for a long moment as if weighing her words carefully, and for the first time there was no wall between them, no polite barrier, just two people trying to understand each other. Suddenly the lights flickered, and the room went dark, the storm outside knocking out power for a few seconds that felt longer than they were, and Noah instinctively turned on the flashlight on his phone, the soft beam cutting through the shadows and landing on her face, and in that gentle light she saw something new in his expression, not distance, not confusion, but trust beginning to form. They both laughed quietly at the timing, at the way the universe seemed to add drama to an already emotional night, and when the lights returned, neither of them moved right away, because the darkness had made their conversation feel braver, more honest, like a secret shared between them. Noah asked what she had been like at his age, and she told him about growing up in Seattle, about dreams of traveling, about mistakes she had made and lessons she had learned. And he listened with real interest, asking questions, smiling at parts of her story, and she realized she was no longer speaking to a child who tolerated her presence but to a young man who wanted to know her as a person. The pizza box sat empty between them, forgotten as the conversation flowed from school stress to college plans to fears about the future, and each answer seemed to build a bridge that had been under construction for years. Outside, the rain began to slow, turning from heavy drops to a light mist, and inside the small hotel room the air felt warmer, not because of the heater but because something guarded had finally relaxed. When Noah stood to throw away the empty soda cans, he paused and said quietly that he was glad it was just the two of them tonight, and Emily felt her heart shift at those words, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, grounding way that promised change. And she realized that sometimes it takes a broken car and a stormy night to force people to sit still long enough to truly see each other, and as they prepared to settle into their separate beds, the space between them no longer felt awkward or strained. It felt gentle, like the beginning of something healthier, something honest, and though neither of them said it out loud, they both sensed that this unexpected night was slowly turning into the moment their family truly began to heal. The room grew quiet after midnight, the kind of deep silence that makes every small sound feel important. And Emily Carter lay awake staring at the ceiling while the faint hum of the heater filled the space between her and Noah Bennett, who was resting in the other bed only a few feet away yet, until tonight, had felt miles apart. The storm had softened outside, rain now falling in a light steady rhythm, and the neon sign across the street blinked through the curtains, casting slow flashes of red against the wall, and Emily tried to sleep but her mind replayed their conversation at the table, every honest word, every softened glance, and she realized that something fragile and hopeful had begun to grow in that small hotel room. Across from her, Noah shifted under the blankets and finally spoke into the darkness, his voice low but clear, asking if she was still awake, and when she answered yes, he hesitated only a second before admitting that he had been thinking about everything they said, that it felt strange but good to finally talk without pretending, and she could hear in his tone that he wasn't just filling silence, he was reaching out. He told her that since his parents' divorce he had carried a quiet fear that nothing stable would last, that every good moment came with an ending attached, and that when she entered his life he didn't know where to place her, didn't know if she was temporary or permanent, and Emily felt the honesty of that confession settle gently in the room, not heavy, not dramatic, just real. She turned onto her side so she could see his outline in the dim light and said that she had felt unsure too, that stepping into a family already shaped by memories and history had made her question herself many times, wondering if she was doing enough or doing too much, wondering if her care was welcome or simply tolerated, and for a moment they both let that shared vulnerability sit between them like proof that neither had been as confident as they pretended. Noah exhaled slowly and admitted that sometimes he had been cold on purpose, that he believed if he kept his distance he wouldn't risk losing another connection, and Emily answered gently that protecting your heart can feel Safe, but it can also build walls too high to see over, and he gave a quiet laugh at that, acknowledging the truth in her words. He then spoke about his mother, about how loyal he felt to her, about the guilt that came whenever he caught himself enjoying a conversation with Emily, as if caring for his stepmother might somehow erase the bond he had with the woman who raised him, and Emily listened without interrupting, understanding that this fear had shaped his behavior more than any anger ever did, and she reassured him that love does not replace, it expands, that families can grow in ways that honor the past instead of erasing it, and that no one expected him to choose sides. The honesty of the moment felt almost delicate, as if one harsh word could break it, but neither of them wanted to damage what was forming, and Noah admitted something that surprised even himself, that he had noticed how hard she tried, how she remembered his favorite snacks, how she showed up at school events. Even when his father was traveling, how she always asked about his day even when he answered with one-word replies, and hearing that made Emily's throat tighten because she had never been sure those efforts mattered. She told him she never wanted to replace anyone, she only wanted to be someone he could trust, someone steady in his life, and he responded quietly that trust was exactly what he felt starting to grow. The heater clicked off, leaving the room even more silent, and for the first time in years their conversation felt easy, not forced, and Noah asked her if she had ever regretted marrying into a ready-made family, a question that carried more weight than he intended, and she answered honestly that there were moments of doubt, moments of exhaustion, but never regret, because loving his father meant loving the life that came with him, and that included Noah. That answer seemed to settle something deep inside him, and he admitted that he didn't want the distance between them anymore, that he was tired of acting indifferent, that he wanted their home to feel warmer, not divided by unspoken tension, and Emily felt a quiet relief wash over her because she had longed to hear those words but never wanted to demand them. Outside, the rain finally slowed to almost nothing, and the world beyond the window felt still, as if giving them privacy to rebuild what had been fragile, and Noah thanked her, not dramatically, not loudly, just a simple thank you for being patient with him, for not giving up when it would have been easier to pull back, and she smiled into the dim light and told him that families are not built in a single day, they are shaped by small consistent choices, and tonight felt like one of those choices. As the minutes passed, the tension that once defined their relationship seemed to dissolve, replaced by something calmer, something steady and mature, and Noah's voice grew softer as sleep began to pull at him. But before drifting off he said that maybe the car breaking down wasn't the worst thing that could have happened, because it forced them to stop running from conversations they needed, and Emily agreed quietly, realizing that sometimes life pauses people on purpose so they can repair more than what is visible under a hood. The neon light outside blinked one last time before going dark, the storm fully gone, and in the peaceful silence that followed, both of them felt lighter, as if years of misunderstanding had finally been set down, and as sleep slowly claimed the room, it carried with it a new sense of connection, not dramatic or overwhelming, but steady and genuine, the kind that grows quietly in honest moments. And for the first time since she became part of his life, Emily sensed that Noah no longer saw her as an outsider standing at the edge of his world, but as someone who truly belonged within it. Morning arrived softly through the thin hotel curtains, pale sunlight spreading across the carpet as if the night had washed everything clean, and Emily Carter opened her eyes with a calm feeling she had not carried in a long time, the storm gone, the air quiet, and for a brief second she forgot where she was until she heard movement across the room and saw Noah Bennett standing near the small coffee machine, carefully pouring water into it like he had done it 100 times before. He glanced over when he noticed she was awake and gave a small, almost shy smile, holding up 2 paper cups as if offering a peace treaty, and she sat up, surprised but touched by the simple gesture. Realizing that sometimes change shows itself in the smallest actions, the room no longer felt tight or awkward, it felt lighter, like the air had shifted during the night and carried away something heavy, and as she accepted the warm cup from him their fingers brushed briefly in a natural, unguarded way, not dramatic, just comfortable, and that comfort meant more than any big speech ever could. They talked easily while packing their bags, folding clothes, zipping backpacks, moving around each other without tension, discussing simple plans about picking up the car, grabbing breakfast on the road, and letting Daniel know they would be home by afternoon. But beneath those ordinary words was a quiet understanding that the night had changed them both. Noah mentioned a college brochure he had been too nervous to show anyone before, and instead of brushing it off, he handed it to her directly, asking what she thought about the program, and Emily felt honored by the trust in that question. Because it meant he valued her opinion, and she responded thoughtfully, encouraging him without pushing, proud of the young man standing before her who was finally letting her see his dreams. When the mechanic called to say the car was ready, they stepped outside into the cool morning air, the town now bright and peaceful, sunlight reflecting off wet pavement, the diner across the street open and smelling of fresh coffee, and as they walked side by side toward the repair shop there was no forced distance between them, no invisible line dividing their steps, just an easy rhythm that felt natural. Noah broke the silence first, saying quietly that he had been thinking about what she said the night before, about love not being a competition, and he admitted that he didn't want to hold on to guilt anymore, that caring about her didn't take anything away from his mom, and hearing him say that out loud felt like watching a door finally close on years of quiet misunderstanding. Emily didn't rush to respond. She simply nodded with a soft smile, understanding that growth often comes in small brave statements like that. And when they reached the repair shop and saw their car parked outside, fixed and waiting, she realized the symbolism was almost too perfect to ignore. The mechanic explained the repairs in simple terms, and Noah listened closely, asking smart questions, stepping into responsibility in a way that showed maturity. And Emily felt a quiet pride rise inside her because she had witnessed his shift from guarded boy to open, thoughtful young man in less than 24 hours. Before getting into the car, Noah paused and looked back at the small hotel across the street, then at her, and said with a half-smile that maybe the breakdown had been lucky in a strange way, because without it they would have kept driving forward without ever stopping to fix what really mattered. And Emily felt emotion rise in her chest at the wisdom in his words. She answered honestly that sometimes life forces pauses for a reason, and that she was grateful for this one. And as they settled into their seats and began the drive home, the road stretched wide under clear skies, no rain, no warning lights flashing, just open highway ahead. The ride felt different from the day before, not because the scenery had changed but because the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful, filled with quiet understanding instead of tension, and they spoke freely about small things, music, future plans, what to tell Daniel about their unexpected adventure, laughing lightly at parts that had felt stressful only hours earlier. At one point Noah thanked her again, not in a dramatic way but sincerely, for being patient with him over the years, for never giving up even when he had kept her at arm's length. And she responded by telling him that family is not built by perfection but by staying, by choosing each other again and again even when it's hard, and he nodded, absorbing that lesson in a way that suggested he would carry it forward into his own future relationships. As the city skyline slowly appeared in the distance, signaling they were close to home, Emily felt a sense of quiet hope settle in her heart because she knew that while life would still bring challenges, busy schedules, disagreements, long work trips, there was now a foundation strong enough to hold them steady. When they finally pulled into their driveway later that morning, the house looked the same as it always had, but stepping out of the car felt different, like crossing into a new chapter rather than returning to an old routine. And before walking inside, Noah gave her a quick, genuine hug, brief but full of meaning, a simple gesture that said more than any long conversation could. Emily closed her eyes for a second, holding on to that moment, knowing that one unexpected night in a small roadside hotel had quietly reshaped their family, not with grand drama or sudden miracles, but with honesty, patience, and the courage to speak what had long been unspoken. And as they opened the front door together, sunlight streaming through the windows, It felt clear that while the car had broken down on a rainy highway, something far more important had been repaired along the way.